Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us this evening to hear a talk about the rather fabulous country that is Namibia in the southwestern corner of Africa. And I'm delighted to introduce the lovely Nick Garbett. No, I'm not. I'm delighted to introduce the lovely Nick Joynes. Too many times I've introduced Nick Garbett, Nick. That's what it is. Introduce the wonderful Nick Joynes, who knows all about Namibia and who very openly says that if you cut him in half, it'll say Namibia down the middle. Isn't that right, Nick?
Probably is. Yeah, yeah. When I cut myself the other day, I didn't bleed. It was just Namib sand coming out of my finger.
Sand that came out. Yeah, maybe you're a maybe you're a lizard. Maybe you're a lizard in a previous life or something.
Maybe,
Who knows?
maybe.
So my only comment to the many of you that are on board with this is simply to say, please do ask us questions. You can do that making use of the chat facility and also the Q&A facility. I'm sure many of you are aware of this by now. Depending on what device you're on, whether you're on a handheld device or a laptop, it'll be in a different place. But keep an eye out for Q&A and also for chat. Please pop any questions on there that you would like Nick to answer, I beg your pardon. And when Nick gets to the end of his presentation, we will, Nick and I will have a chat and I can pose some of your questions to him. But I suspect many of them will be answered during the course of his talk. Nick, I'm going to hand over to you if that's all right. I'll be here. I will be listening with great interest as ever, and I'll come back on at the end. Over to you.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you everybody for joining us this evening. I have to say it's really lovely to see some familiar names on the guest list who've arrived. Some of whom have travelled with me on one of my trips to Namibia in the last few years. So it's great to see you there. So thanks very much for joining us, everybody. And if you've never been to Namibia before, it's probably been on your bucket list for a very long time. I do hope that this inspires you to take the plunge and just get Namibia off your list, because it's one of those destinations that everybody really should experience. And certainly from everybody who's traveled with me to Namibia, they do come back saying that they'd wish they'd done it sooner, and it's a place that they really do want to go back to again. So I've been traveling to Namibia now since the turn of the millennium. It was in 2000 that I went first of all, and I've been going back, COVID aside, a couple of times every year since then, thereabouts. And it's a destination that I don't know why it has captured my my desire for travel so much, but I think one of the main reasons is that every time I go back, I'm always experiencing something new, or I'm going to a new area of the country and I'm learning something new about it. But it's a very striking destination. It's incredibly beautiful, as you'd expect. And one of the things that really, really attracted to me about the country in the first place was its population density. Very, very few people live in the country. When I first went there, it was about 2 million. It's actually risen over the last 25 years or so, particularly in the last 10 years. It's over 3 million now. But for a country that is 4 or 5 times the size of the UK, the population density is still one of the lowest of all of the countries in the world. And that affords incredible landscapes that remain untouched by the human hand, where you can really get a sense of the grandeur of Africa, but also the grandeur of these incredible scenes and incredible landscapes that Namibia has. An incredibly arid environment, desert areas in certain places, lush and verdant lands in others, but areas where you can really, really feel the sense of space and the sense of landscape, true scenic landscape, all around you. It's an incredible destination just to go and feel complete solitude as well. And within these vast landscapes, there does survive an incredible amount of wildlife, which I'll come on to shortly. The other reason that I love Namibia so much, and I keep going back there, is the diversity of landscapes. Working one's way north from the very southern border with South Africa, you have the Orange River, which at times is very slow moving, meandering, at other times fast flowing, boiling, full of rapids, but cutting through this incredibly harsh, rocky mountain landscape. Just further north from there, you have the Fish River Canyon, which is the second largest canyon in the world. An incredible scene where the Lowen River confluences with the Fish River. Terrific amount of raptors to be seen down in the Fish River. One or two predators can be seen there on occasions as well. Brown hyena, leopard. I've never seen the leopard here, but I know that they are there. I have seen brown hyena down there. But it's more the grandeur, the spectacle of the landscape that draws people into that sort of area. But then further north still, the landscape changes once more in a very stark and dramatic way, where you have the Namib Sand Sea, the Namib Desert, which is this vast amount of land that is covered by this ancient desert that is slowly moving its way further northwards as well. And then beyond the Namib Sand Sea, the desert, you then have the central bushlands of Namibia, which are stunning, stunning areas where cattle farming used to happen. It still does to a certain degree, but it was used to be dominated by the cattle farmers. But you have these incredible bushlands, which during the spring months, especially now, I've recently returned from Namibia just a couple of weeks ago, are absolutely majestic, a rainbow of colors throughout the entirety of the central bushlands. Really, really beautiful mountain sides covered in these beautiful grasses, incredible wildflowers. It's a really beautiful scene to see, especially during these spring months. And if you've been to Namibia before during the drier months, I would urge you to go during the spring months when the rains are still falling quite hard. But the color is just electric. It's a stunning area to go and visit. And then it changes once more as you head out further northwest into the Skeleton Coast area, the Kunene region, the Kauko land, Skeleton Coast National Park. These names are all synonymous with Namibia, and it's a very harsh landscape, as you can imagine. It's pure desert as well. In that further north, this is built up from all the sands from the Namib Sand Sea that have been blown further north and up onto this mountainous belt that is the northwestern region of Namibia on the border with Angola. These are the flat top mountains. I liken them to the flat top mountains in Venezuela, if anybody's been there. Not as big as a Tepui that you have there, but still very, very reminiscent of them. And through the foothills of these Table Mountains run the rivers during the seasonal raining period, which is basically from December through until February, March time. And otherwise, they're dried river systems where the desert adapted wildlife spend their time eking out a very harsh existence. And then across the northern part of Namibia, right the way over, cutting across the top of Botswana, cutting right into Zimbabwe and Zambia, you have the Caprivi Strip, which is a very lush and verdant area. It's a stunning part of Namibia to visit, and for all intents and purposes, it's really only Namibia by name. It's much more reminiscent of the northern parts of Botswana, the Savuti, the Linyanti, and the Chobe rivers are all up in that region. So it's a very Botswana-like part of Namibia, but stunning to go and see as well. And across those mountains, you reach into the Apupa Falls, where you have these terrific date palms that are up there as well. It's a really beautiful area, fantastic for birding, I have to say. Absolutely majestic bird watching country up there on the Caprivi, that whole northern stretch along the Kunene River and the Kavango River going into the Chobe during the April-May period, June as well. It's terrific for the bird life up there. And there's an abundance of bird watching to be done up there. So it's not just the population density, it's not just the landscapes, but it's the wildlife as well. And particularly, I think that I would describe my real fascination with Namibia is the harmony between the landscapes and the scenery and the habitat and the environments and the wildlife, and how the wildlife lives in these ever-changing and very, very harsh landscapes. And that those landscapes are so diverse throughout the whole country as well. And what I've done with this presentation, I'm just going to highlight a handful of areas, if you like, where I feel that the wildlife is particularly good. And you can't really talk about Namibia without talking about Etosha National Park. It is the premier national park of the country, of course, along with the Namib Desert as well. But for wildlife viewing, Etosha is it. Etosha translates as a great white place. That was what the Haikom, the Bushman community who still live in the area, referred to it centuries ago. And it's formed with the eastern side, which is this vast salt pan, absolutely gigantic, about the size of Wales. And then over on the western side, you have bushland, basically. And the wildlife that dominates Etosha is typically found on the edges of the eastern side of that salt pan. And something that really, really fascinates me about Etosha and never fails to amaze me are these terrific congregations of wildlife that you get and the variety of wildlife that you get. The best time to go and really experience it is towards the very, very end of the dry season, the winter season. So the rains stop falling typically, mid-March, end of March, early April sometimes. And then it doesn't rain right the way through until there's an early raining season right at the end of October, early November. So if you can time it carefully, then you want to be as late into that season as you possibly can, so that the standing water in Etosha National Park has pretty much gone. And during that September-October period, when it's getting hotter and hotter and hotter and drier and drier and drier, the wildlife tends to congregate more and more and more in ever-growing numbers around the sparse water holes around the edge and in the salt pan itself. And that's where you get these huge gatherings of wildlife. On a trip that I did back in October of last year, we went over to one of the water holes just in the center of Etosha, on the border between the western and eastern side. There must have been 400 or 500 animals all gathering around this one water hole: giraffe, Burchell zebra, black-faced impala, springbok. There were elephant there, oryx, wildebeest were there as well. It's just amazing to see that amount of wildlife all around a very, very densely in dense congregation around a very small water hole. A water hole that would probably only measure about 30 meters across by about 40 meters across, something like that. And then with that scene, you have the wind blowing, it's kicking up enormous amounts of dust and sand blowing around everywhere. It's quite an impressive scene to go and witness, and to go and watch as well. And you can spend, hours just, taking it all in and watching the wildlife, how they behave with one another. The springbok and the impala are usually getting pretty bad tempered with each other. It's interesting to watch how the wildlife interacts with each other, how the hierarchy works, how the wildlife tends to give way, for example, to the elephants when they want to have water, and how the Burchell zebra tend to dominate the water as well, and how the springbok and the impala just stand there pretty much all day waiting for their moment when the other wildlife starts to move away towards the end of the day, and they can then finally get to have their water as well. But then there are other parts of Etosha where you really get a scene for quietness and peacefulness and beauty as well. And in the savanna areas, the bushland areas, it's a lonely existence and it's a harsh existence for the wildlife, but there's real beauty there as well. And there's good congregations of blue wildebeest in Etosha, but it's the elephant that a lot of people really want to come and see, and that's what they're attracted to see as well. And again, during, particularly August, September, and into October, you get large breeding herds of elephant, and the matriarchs, they start to come together, and sometimes those breeding herds, which on their own can be, a dozen to 20 or 30 elephant, but every now and then you get one of these herds coming together with another herd, and then a third or even a fourth herd join them, and you can get 150 elephants, even up to 200 elephants all together at one time. And that's pretty impressive to see that within Etosha. And again, the thing that I love about elephants, and I'll say this later in the presentation, is that they're always doing something, always doing something. They're always thinking, they're always scraping their feet, they're always interacting with each other, they're always moving, they're eating or drinking or bathing. And Etosha has so much to offer elephant, and it's a great place to go and see them in large numbers as well, and to watch them behaving in the way that they do within Etosha, which is desperate for water, getting water, and always cleaning themselves and always on the move. It's a great scene for elephant. And then within Etosha, you've also got your lots of typical wildlife as well. You'll have the spotted hyena. There's no brown hyena there. It's not great for them. There's some right over on the western side, but over on the eastern side, it's not really the right habitat for them. But the opportunists, the spotted hyena, they are around. And of course, lion are there, cheetah are there, and also leopard as well. And within Etosha, it's pretty amazing how close the wildlife comes to you and how at ease they are as you drive through the park. This was a photo I took. It was some years ago, but the lion, we had 3 female lions just lying down pretty much beside the road, and we were able just to park the vehicle and watch and observe them for a good half an hour or so before then moving on. So there's an abundance of wildlife to be seen within Etosha. But one of the things I also like about Etosha is that it's bordered by some brilliant private reserves as well, and some very well established private reserves at that. Reserves that were in actual fact part of a buffer zone that used to form on the edges of Etosha National Park as it is now. And the blue dots on this map indicate where 2 of them are. The one to the south, to the left, that's Ongava, the private reserve. And then the one to the right over on the eastern side, that's Onguma. And these are both brilliant reserves, to go and stay at because the accommodations are superb. Both of those reserves have accommodations that I prefer to stay at when I do my group tours. But also they have very good private reserves with excellent wildlife viewing opportunities. So in Ongava, it's very good for rhino, and that's black and white rhino. The rhino that you can see in Ongava, you can, if you're very, very fortunate and with the right guide, you can go out and do a walking safari out of the vehicle to get not too close to them, but closer than you've probably been to rhino before, perhaps. And that's a thrilling experience. It's not a traditional walking safari like you can do in Zambia, for example, but it's a walking with wildlife experience. And in the evening, when we do those drives, if you're with the right guide and if they come across the right rhino, then yeah, we'll be allowed to get out of the vehicle and approach to a certain safe distance and then just sit and observe. And that's a real thrill. Yeah, what an experience it is to see them, and it's a wonderful place to go and have those evening drives as well. But they've also got a terrific amount of other wildlife to be seen there. Greater kudu, oh, I love the kudu. You see those in Etosha as well. Very regal, very majestic animals. But what I especially like about Ongava is that they have an amazing hide. They rebuilt it about 6 or 7 years ago, and it's right at the foot of the lodge. And yeah, they've got a terrific water hole there, which is solar pumped, and it's very well attended to by all of the wildlife that they have within the park. I've seen so much from this water hole and from the hide. I used to really enjoy photography, and yeah, it provides a great vantage point for all you photographers who really want to experience and not only wildlife encounters, but also be able to capture them beautifully on film as well. Then this is a great place to do that. And as I say, it's very, very well attended by all of the wildlife within the reserve. And yeah, when the elephant come and you're in one of those hides, you really do have a sense of just how big the elephant here are. And the hide is brilliantly positioned just above water level as well. The wildlife walks all the way around the water holes, and sometimes it's only about 3 or 4 feet away from your lens. And you can really, really capture some wonderful images. But even if you just want to put your camera down and just take in the spectacle and just watch with your own eyes and listen to everything and have that full sensory experience, the hide at Ongava is the place to do it. It's absolutely spectacular. And with the visitors that it gets, you should be lucky enough to get pretty much all of the images that you would want as well. And then out in the reserve itself, the guiding there is excellent. They've got really good guides that I work with there as well. And they've got some great routes that they'll take us out on. And yeah, everything is there for you to be seen. And the prides of lion, they've got 3 prides of lion on the Ongava Reserve that move around. Sometimes they're going off into Etosha on occasions, but a lot of the time they're mainly here in the reserve as well. And they're also doing what lions do, not only in Etosha, but also in the reserve as well. And it was one of the first trips that I led into Namibia, into Ongava itself, where yeah, 2 prides of lion had come together and had taken a very old giraffe down overnight. And yeah, we were taken off to the kill site. And it was incredible to watch even the hierarchy within those 2 prides of lion, how that worked as well. And yeah, quite a scene, quite a sight, I have to say. Very, very moving. Not distressing so much, but just very, very moving. And there was a very religious-like atmosphere at that site, because there was this quietness and this kind of reverence that seemed to dominate that particular scene, as some lion were stretching and relaxing, having fed. Others were moving in and just having their feed as well. There was something very, very moving about that whole experience, and we sat there for a good half an hour or more, just watching that unfold. It was quite an incredible experience. And then over on Guma side, on the eastern side, tends to be that the eastern side in Etosha is very good for other predators, cheetah and leopard. I'm frequently seeing cheetah over on that side, less so on the southern side. And here on the Onguma Reserve, you can see wonderful wildlife. It's really good for birds on the Onguma side because the vegetation is completely different. They've got a lot of palm trees over there. There's quite a lot of water just on the Onguma Reserve as well. There's an enormous amount of vegetation there, so it's very good for birds. But it's also good for the predators as well. And then back over at Ongava, this was a leopard that we saw early one morning. We'd come back, we're having breakfast, and one of the guests shrieked. There was a leopard, and we looked around, and yes, this leopard was just loping towards the water hole. We were able to get, half a dozen or so pictures. She was there for literally about 50 seconds or so, and then she was gone back off into the bush again. So being in the right place at the right time, isn't that the story with wildlife? And we've been very fortunate, but it goes to show that despite the harsh environment of Etosha, despite that aridity and the lack of water for 9-10 months of the year, there is an amazing amount of wildlife that survives there, and it's a very finely balanced existence that they have, of course, but they do survive, and they survive through adaptation. And that's one of the things that, as I say, it really attracts me about Namibia. It's that harmony, it's that balance, it's that battle, if you like, between the landscape and the habitat and the environment and how wildlife exists there. And another place that really fascinates me for completely different reasons and for completely different types of wildlife is the Namib Desert. So this area here that you can see, that's the Namib Desert as we would always refer to it. The truth is that the Namib Desert stretches right the way up the entire coastline of Namibia, across the Cunania River, and then even into Angola. But we won't go into that now. We'll just refer to the Namib Desert as being the sand sea that is that triangular area there that I've highlighted. And oh my gosh, what an incredible place to go and see. And for those of you who have been there, you will know how dramatic the scene is. You will know how impressive the dunescapes are. You will know how enormous these dunes are as well, and how spectacular the landscape is. And it really, really is absolutely jaw-dropping. It's awesome in the true sense of that word. I love going to the desert. It's one of those places that is always changing. It always looks slightly different, but I kind of know what to expect, but it still amazes me. This is probably one of the most photographed areas of the Namib Desert. This is Dead Flay, and this is taken from the top of a rather unimaginatively named sand dune called Big Daddy, because it's the biggest dune in Namibia, in the Namib Desert. And this is looking down into Dead Flay, which was thousands of years ago full of water. It's where one of the rivers ran through the desert, but has now been cut off by the sands moving further north. And it's left here this dried vley where these trees are now going slowly through a process of petrification. And so over millions of years, they will turn to stone. And what an incredible place to go and see. What a beautiful place to go and photograph. It is a photographer's paradise down here, without a doubt. Getting up early, getting there for sunrise, having a good 4 or 5 hours out there before all the light bleaches away is the thing to do. And if you're lucky, you can get back out again in the evening. But it's a beautiful place to go to. And this is an image that I haven't taken, obviously, sadly. Perhaps one day I will. And it shows the Namib Desert. And you can see that, I don't know if you can see my cursor or not, but here it is here. And this is a stark line where the Namib Desert ends. And this is a dried river system called the Kuisib. And the Kuisib is an ephemeral river, which I'll talk about in a little while. And ephemeral rivers, they only flow a few weeks of the year, and they're very dependent upon the rainfall, and that is it. And the rainfall from their vast catchment areas. And the Kuisib, it harnesses this massive amount of water, and it washes all of the sand that's blown into the dried riverbed during the dry spell out into the sea. And then that sand gets deposited further north up here, and then forms the sands of the dunes in the Skeleton Coast. But it's a particularly important place within the Kuisib River, and this is it in full flow. This is a photograph taken, believe it or not, today. And this shows the river in full flow today, washing all of the sand out. And you can see the dunes in the background. That's the Great North Wall, if you like, of the Namib Desert. That's how I refer to it. And it's washing all of the sand out into the Atlantic Ocean. And this is that natural barrier that's preventing the dunes moving further northwards. And there's a particularly important site on this river system called Gobabeb, and this is where there is a Desert Research Foundation. And this is an institute of world renowned where researchers come to study desert morphology. They come to study the adaptations that wildlife is making to live in the desert, and so much more. And this is a photograph that's taken from the top of the dunes, looking down into the riverbed, which is that green belt in the foreground. You've got the research centre there, and then beyond that, looking further north, that's the ancient desert gravel plains. And if you imagine tens of thousands of years ago, hundreds of thousands of years ago, that's what it would have looked like where the photograph is being taken from. But the dunes have now overcome that area, and they're moving swiftly across a gravel plain just like that. So in time, they will make the leap across, and the dunes will move further north across that gravel plain as well. It's an amazing place to go to, and I really, really love bringing the groups here, because you learn so much about the desert, here than you can learn about the desert in any other part of the country. And it's great going out early in the morning with the head of research, a terrific guy called Eugene, and we go out and we do what's called reading the morning news, where you go out and you track all of the animals that have been moving around in the sands overnight, and he will explain what animal they were, what they were doing, where they were going, etc. So this is one of the imprints that we came across, and this is from the dune lark, an endemic bird just found in the Namib Desert. Really beautiful, and there's a particular site where I like to go to, where you can get some great photographs of them as well. This is not by the dune lark. If you're not keen on spiders, then don't look at the next slide. I'll tell you when it's coming up. But this is an imprint from the dancing white lady spider, and the imprint that you can see in the middle of that flower-like imprint is the abdomen of the spider, and then those petals, if you like, around the outside, those are its feet touching the ground. And what the dancing white lady spider does when the male wishes to try and find a female, he'll do a dance, and he basically, jiggers around like this in a circular motion, rather like a wheel, basically jiggling around and trying to attract the female that way, not only through vibrations, but by performance as well. And if the female likes the dance and likes what the male is doing, then the natural thing happens, and they mate. If she doesn't like the way that he dances, well, he's a lucky guy, because they will also then mate. Although not so lucky, because then she will kill him. So that's just the way that it works in that world. And this is the dancing lady spider. As I say, if you don't like spiders, look away now. That's what it looks like. They're about the size of, what are they about the size of? They're about the size of a golf ball or so, something like that. That's how large they are when you see them on the ground there. There are other spiders to be seen in the Namib Desert as well, which I haven't got included in this presentation. There's the wheel spider, which is a spider that gets up to the top of the dunes, and to get away from its prey, it turns itself into a wheel and literally just rolls down the side of the dunes. That's how it gets away from the animals that are preying upon it. This is the track of the golden mole. Beautiful, beautiful golden mole. Completely blind, has the ability to swim through the sands. An incredible sense of movement, and preys upon all the small things like ants and dune bugs. And yeah, by swimming through the sand, does not run across the top, just swims through the sand, and listening and sensing movement in the sands around it, and then preying upon that movement. And this is the palmetto gecko, a really stunning lizard, and they're endemic to the Namib Desert as well. There's also shovel-nosed geckos that have a shovel-like snout that burrow into the sand as well. There's a whole load of incredible adaptive wildlife to be seen here in the desert, and how they survive is quite incredible. And often when I bring groups here, hours are spent on hand and knee photographing ripples in the sand, photographing any bugs or beetles or geckos or spiders that we might see, but also the grasses as well. And this is a photograph that, for me, it sums up life in the desert. The Namib Desert is absolutely dependent upon water, but it's one of the driest places in the world. And that's because there's no rainfall there. The water that is created or that comes into the desert here is from fog, and a dune fog, which is thick, and the fog, it clings to the grasses in particular, and those grasses then have adapted themselves to then form funnels where they harness water, and the wildlife then comes to take the water by eating the grasses, but also just drinking the water from the grasses as well. Incredible adaptations that are made just from fog, and that's with all the small wildlife. And why I like coming to the desert is because, for me, wildlife isn't only about seeing, the great African wildlife that you can see in Etosha or other parts of the country, but it's also about going micro and going macro and understanding the stuff that we would often pass by as well. The coastline is full of an abundance of wildlife, great birds to be seen, flamingo colonies in the northern part of the Namib Desert in Walvis Bay, where there are lesser and greater flamingos. The colony here is about 20,000 or so, something like that. It's becoming increasingly dispersed between the salt lagoons that are out on the Atlantic coast in the Walvis Bay Lagoon, as well as in the Walvis Bay desert ponds that are now forming right at the delta of the Kusib River as well. And there's a lot of other coastal birds to be seen there, including pelican too. And then further up north, you have great colonies of Cape fur seals. Cape Cross is probably the most well-known one. If you've been there, I'm sure that you'll be very familiar with these sorts of scenes, and I'm sure that it will bring back some ghastly memories of just how much it smells as well. It really is quite an overpowering aroma that the Cape fur seals have. I'm sure it's not unique to Cape fur seals for that matter, but this is one of the areas where you can see them in abundance at the Cape Cross seal colony there. And then looking at the Skeleton Coast, one can't talk about Namibia without talking about the Skeleton Coast and all of the beautiful ephemeral rivers. The Skeleton Coastline itself is this northwestern corner of Namibia itself, and that forms part of the Kunene and the Kalko land too. These ephemeral rivers, they are just the most beautiful areas to go and see. They are incredibly important for the life of the Namibian wildlife that we have. These are all of the rivers that we see here. Running from the north to the south, there's about 13 of them altogether. And pretty much all of them cut through the Skeleton Coast National Park as well. The ones that I'm particularly fascinated with are the most impressive ones because they have these vast catchment areas. The Huarusib, which is the large green one at the very top, and the Huanib, which is the grey one just beneath that large green one. Each of them has around about 28,000 square kilometers of a catchment area. So when we talk about an ephemeral river being reliant upon the rain, that amount of rainfall in that area across that amount of land creates these incredible floods into these dried river systems at very, very concentrated periods of time. And just to like show you how that that map of the ephemeral rivers works its way over the country with this particular map, you can see them there all the way down through the Skeleton Coast National Park, coming down to Swakopmund, which is just above Walvis Bay where the flamingo colonies are. There's a big river there, the Swakop River, and this river here just beneath the yellow one in the middle there, that's the Kuisib River, which is basically the natural barrier to the Namib Desert being blown further north. These are really, really stunning areas, hard to travel to, hard to travel in, and for the wildlife that exists there, hard to survive. But when we talk about the wildlife of Namibia, you have to talk about Etosha. We've got to talk about the coast. We've got to talk about the desert. We must talk about these ephemeral rivers, because for me, this is really where Namibia starts to set itself apart from its neighboring countries. You know, Botswana, Zambia. I know it's not neighboring, but it's the same region. Certainly, it's setting itself well apart from the wildlife and the scenery of Eastern Africa as well. This is Africa as you won't have experienced it before. And for me, the wildlife that is here, it's hard to find, but when you do find it, it's a really, really incredible experience. And these ephemeral rivers, this is overlooking the Guanib River. These ephemeral rivers cut through really hard landscapes, very, very arid areas indeed. The Guanib is mainly cutting through desert area, so it's cutting through sand, and it brings in vast amounts of water, as I say, from about a catchment area of about 26,000 square kilometers. It's got this amazing scenery with these beautiful Arna trees. This is what it looks like for most of the year. It's got a very, very hard crust that is formed from when the water has previously flown. That water has both evaporated and sunk down into the aquifer beneath, and then in doing so, with the harsh heat, it's baked a surface, a crust, if you like, over that. So that means that the water beneath the surface is being, maintained. It's not evaporating, and that hard surface is like a thick eggshell, is creating a really, really smooth, flat surface for when the river flows again, for it to come skating down here with great speed and with great efficiency. I've been lucky enough to see the river arrive once. When I say arrive, I was about half a day late, which is a pity. But I've seen, the basic arrival of the water here, and it really is absolutely stunning. And it's incredible to think that this water, it gets high. It gets about 9-10 foot high, and it's like a boiling, muddy mass of fast-moving water. And the evidence of this flood that we see that happens here every year is seen when we come here as a group. If you come here yourselves, you'll see enormous trees brought down in the floods. You'll see an incredible amount of destruction from further upstream being brought down and deposited, high up into the Arna trees that are in the middle of the river system as well. It's really, quite an unimaginable scene. But this amount of water that is there, and I say is there, we can't see it because it's all under the ground. It brings in an amazing amount of wildlife. There's a lot of antelope species, so you have springbok here. You've got the queen and the king of desert adaptation, the oryx or the gemsbok here. You've got mountain zebra, the Hartmann zebra, and you've got southern giraffe and Angolan giraffe in the river systems as well. and they're all grazing on, you know, the amount of vegetation that is here. And if you've got animals like that, then you've got animals like this. And these are critically endangered desert adapted lion. And we say critically endangered. Each time I've come here, the number moves around a little bit, but each time I've come here, the numbers are anything between 5 or 6 or 11 or 12, somewhere around there, and it's moving all the time. They're absolutely stunning. We've been fortunate enough to see lion here on all but one of the trips that I've done into the area. It's a massive area that we have to cover because it's, you know, an entire river system within the Skeleton Coast area. So, you know, depending on where they are and depending on where we are, and there's a lot of land in the middle. But we have been really fortunate to see them at quite close quarters as well. These are the vehicles that are used to get around in the area, and the only vehicles worth using as well, I have to say. Yeah, it's really, really humbling and very, very moving when you do encounter them, because by the point you get into the Huanib or into the Huarasib, you know how harsh the landscape is. You've either seen it from above by flying in, or you've driven in, as I've done before as well, and it's taken a couple of days to do that. And when you do see, you know, these beautiful animals in this environment, in this habitat, you won't forget it. And I hope people won't mind me saying, when you know who you are, but those of you who've traveled with me, many of you have shed a tear at those encounters, because it is so moving, and you know how critically endangered they are as well. And it's a very, very, you know, beautiful experience to see them. And just to give you an idea of the scene and the beauty of these animals, this was a video that I took from October of last year with a group. I have to say, I remember that moment so clearly when we came across that lion, and it was in the most beautiful area, as you can see, on the most beautiful evening, and this beautiful young male lion was there, and yeah, it was really, really very, very, very memorable, I think, is the way. And for the few of you who are on this presentation who are also there, I hope that brings back some good memories for you all. But it's not just the lion that we want to try and see there. Of course, you know, these guys, you know, the desert adapted elephant. I remember the first time I saw a desert adapted elephant, and I did shed a tear because I've driven into the Huanib, and I was tired, and I was with a friend at the time, and we had you know, had quite a struggle getting there, and I've never seen desert adapted elephant before. And as I said earlier, having driven in, I knew how hard this landscape was, and I just, you know, I couldn't imagine seeing elephant here. You know, I was used to seeing elephant in, you know, Botswana, in, you know, Tanzania, in Kenya, you know, these places where there's, you know, masses of water for them. But this didn't feel right. But they are here, and they're here in abundance as well. Well, I say abundance, relative abundance. They're residential herds, basically family herds that come to the dried river systems when the rains have stopped. They're not here when it's flowing because they're not going to survive, because they're just going to get washed out. They need to have this dry area where they can dig for water. When the river is in full flood, there's nowhere for them to be, so they go to other areas. But when that flood subsides and calm settles again, then they come back in. The Quanib has, I think it's about 26 elephants altogether in its entire river system. The Huarisib, which is further north, I understand it has 4, and those are males up there. Down in the Huarisib, there are 2 males, and then the other 24 or so are made up of 3 breeding herds. It's incredible coming out to find them. It's amazing to think that they are here. The elephant, they're always doing something. They're always on the move here. Always they're moving, west to east or east to west. And when they're not doing that, they'll just be pausing for short moments to graze, and they do graze. We're used to seeing. I say we're used. We may not be unfamiliar with the idea of elephant, destruction and going through vegetation and destroying vegetation and pushing trees down and all sorts like that. We're used to seeing that sort of damage on wildlife trips in Africa from elephant. Here they behave in a completely different way. They have been taught how to survive through a matriarchal line. They know how they need to preserve their environment and preserve their habitat for themselves so that they don't destroy it. So they graze, rather like a black rhino will graze, a white rhino will graze from the grass moving along all the time. These guys will graze and browse as they move down and up and down the rivers as well. They're never going to destroy trees. They're never going to, pull down enormous, great big branches off trees or anything like that. They're just wanting to have a little bit of fresh vegetation, fresh food from one plant and one bush, etc., from one tree, and then move on to the next. And they graze from the ana trees, and they browse from the ana trees as well. It's great to watch their behavior, and when you see them digging for the water as well, scraping the river bed away with their feet and with their trunk to get to the water where it is. They know where the water is closest to the surface as well. They can smell the water, and they're always teaching their young as well. Always there's going to be a youngster who's watching and trying to imitate and copy what the older sister or what the mother is doing all the time. And you see great adaptation as well, how they are learning, more and more and more to actually get to the best vegetation that they can as well. I've seen elephant here standing up on their 2 hind legs even, believe it or not. It's quite incredible. And as I say, the elephant here, as the elephant are everywhere, always doing something. But here you can just watch and watch and watch. They're incredibly at ease, and the backdrop and the setting here is really, really stunning as well. And this was another video that I wanted to show you of the background scenery and the way that the elephant are just moving all the time from one browsing place to another. That's how they work, and it's working from inland out to the coast and then back in again, and that's what they're doing all the time. And they do get out to the coast. They walk right the way out through the delta areas, and they do go right onto the beach, and they walk along the beach to then access the next river bed, between the Quanib and the Huarisib. That's how they will move between those 2 river systems there. So it's wonderful to see them. And as I say, those are all of the ephemeral rivers that Namibia has. and those northern ones in particular are fantastic for desert adaptation. And going by land over from the Juaneb into the Huarazib, which is one of the northernmost ephemeral rivers, one travels over this incredible desert plain, a high skeleton coast desert plain that rises up, steadily and steeply out of the sand system of the Juaneb, and then descends seemingly very steeply down into the Huarazib river system, which for me is one of the most dramatic river systems of all the ephemeral rivers in Namibia, because this river cuts through a harsh rock canyon, and it goes right the way through this incredible rock formation. On the top of these mountain-like canyon walls, you have the Skeleton Coast Desert. So you have these, sand falls coming down into the Huarazib all the time. The Huarazib has one of the largest catchment areas, and so there's a massive amount of water here. And even when the river is not running, the water is never that far away from the surface. So you do get these beautiful marshy ponds as well. So not only can you be watching elephant here, but you can also be having a fantastic birding trip as well as marveling at the incredible scenery as well. And the scenery through the Huarazib is absolutely spectacular. And I'm a real believer in saying that once you get into this area of Namibia, it's not only about it being, a wildlife safari, but it is also a safari of landscapes, a safari of habitat, a safari of environments, because the scenery is just absolutely off the scale. It really, really is. And despite the amount of times that I've been here, it still makes me tingle going there. And even here, sitting now talking to you all, it makes me tingle to know that that place is still there doing exactly what it has always done for thousands of years, and it will continue to do that for many thousands of years as well. It's a really, really very, very beautiful area, and it's that where that little red circle is, that for me is like the real sweet spot. So I need to start wrapping up with bringing what makes Namibia tick, and how you go about doing it. Well, you can get around Namibia pretty effortlessly if you're willing to put in the effort, if that makes sense. Self-driving is fine. You can do guided driving, and you can do these wonderful fly-in safaris as well. These fly-in safaris will take you directly into those key areas that you want to get into with a certain amount of comfort and a certain amount of ease. The self-drive routes are really great. Self-driving in Namibia is a really great option if you want to do something where you can be a little bit more independent. It's a very popular choice in Namibia, increasingly so, and you can move from one location to another, pretty safely, pretty easily, as long as you're able to drive a car safely. At each location, you'll latch onto the expert guides in each of those areas. Probably not best to do a self-drive into the Skeleton Coast unless you're especially proficient with four-wheel driving. Private guided drives are a really good option as well. They'll take you way off the beaten track into areas that you may not feel so confident doing, as a self-drive, such as Skeleton Coast. In terms of accommodation, you've got everything you want. If you're a real, rough it wilderness kind of person, then sure, you can do safaris that are using these dome-style safari tents. If you want to do a self-drive that's got a bit of camping and a bit of accommodation, then you can do something like this, where you have the tents on the roof. You see a lot of people doing those. If you want to do something where you're doing, you're taking yourself from one fixed tented camp to another, there are lots more tented camps opening up now in the very wild areas of Namibia too, as well. So this can be a really good option. But then, even in the most remote places, even on the Skeleton Coast line itself, There are great accommodations to access, and I would fully recommend going to some of the areas that I've mentioned earlier. And there's really going to be great comfort if you want it as well. The sky's the limit, really, in terms of the amount of accommodations that have true luxurious comfort in the most stunning areas as well. So accommodation is not a problem for you. I would say that if you want a destination that you can really escape to, that you can escape within, you can indulge yourself in incredible wildlife, incredible scenery, fantastic hospitality. Namibia has to be the place. If it's been on your bucket list, it's about time you got it off your bucket list, and it's about time you went there. The sundowners are sublime. There's always going to be a table laid for you wherever you are that will have a gin, a tonic, a white wine, a red wine, or a soft drink, whatever you want, anywhere in Namibia. Yeah, what a place to go and watch the sun go down, or for that matter, the sun rise as well. You just have to go. I hope that's helped. I hope that's inspired you. Thank you all very much. I hope that you're all still there and that you haven't fallen asleep.
Nick, that was absolutely tremendous. Thank you very, very much indeed. Could I trouble you just to ping on to that next slide?
Yes.
Because I think you've got a bit. You were going to run through that and one or two other things, weren't you?
Yes, I was. If this has,
I'll leave you to do that then.
You're absolutely right. I was genuinely, I forgot about this slide. I was waiting for you to do questions and answers. So this is a trip that I do every October. It's called A Living Desert, and I've been doing this for about 10 years or so now. And I choose to do it in October because, as I said at the very top of the presentation, it's a fantastic time to go and see the wildlife of Etosha. It's a fantastic time to go and experience the life of the living desert in the Skeleton Coast before the water arrives, and also the life of the living desert in the Namib Desert as well. The idea of this trip is to tell the story of adaptation across challenging environments, and the way that different animals will be in different areas, and also how those different animals survive in those different areas. It's a specialist small group tour just for 10 clients, and we use a light aircraft to get around, purely for time and also for the areas that we're going into. The way the itinerary works is we go to the eastern part of Etosha National Park, the southern part as well. We go to the Ongava Private Reserve and the Onguma Private Reserve, where those two fantastic hides are. We go into the Skeleton Coast to the Huanib and the Huarasib. We go down through the Walvis Bay lagoons to try and see the flamingos and the pelicans. And then we go into the Kuisib River to that amazing Desert Research Institute and experience the Namib Desert there as well. It's about 15 days UK to UK. Yeah, it's a real adventure. This is the route that it does. We'll be doing it in October of 2026. This is how we'll be getting around in the Grand Caravan, the Cessna 208. This is how we arrive in each of our locations, a vehicle ready to pick us up and whisk us off to the wildlife and the accommodations that we go to. And this is the kind of way that we'll travel around, and this is the sort of scenery that we'll be experiencing when we're on land as well. So yeah, if you would like to do that, then there'll be a little poll in just a minute where you can request a travel plan for that. And I promise you, whatever the itinerary does, we will do. And there'll be all sorts of other things that we do in the middle, such as going into these sorts of lunar landscape areas, which was very much off-piste last time, but it was an area that I was really keen to show the group. And off we went into that area to really go and understand what the Skeleton Coast is all about. So yes, that was what I wanted to say. So if you have any questions, or you would like to request a travel plan all about Namibia, there's going to be a little poll that you can select the travel plan that you want, and I'll be very happy to give an overview of what each of the other trips does as well.
So Nick, thank you very, very much. You quite like Namibia then?
Yeah, it's all right.
That was wonderful. Thank you very much indeed. That's absolutely tremendous. Now look, we have had one or two questions, I have to say.
Okay.
And one or two of them, as you might imagine, do kind of they do pose questions that in actual fact you've answered during the course of the presentation. But I don't think that's not such a bad thing, right? Because sometimes people, well, I think, you know, we all can sometimes need a bit of well, reminding perhaps of some of these things. So
Yeah, there's a lot of information to take in.
yeah, there's a lot. There is a lot. So Andy has asked about getting between different areas. I know you kind of mentioned that at the end. I guess there were two related questions that Andy has asked. One of them is about moving between locations, you know, vehicles, flying, etc., etc. So perhaps you might just cover that in a second again. I know
Yeah.
you covered it to some extent, but also there is an additional question that he asks, an additional point he makes about the number of vehicles that one might see at a waterhole at the peak time of year. In the dry season, for example, is it going to be a Masai Mara type experience? Though that wasn't specifically the question, but is there going to be a whole lineup of other jeeps, etc.? Could you just kind of comment on that?
Yeah. So I'll do the first one first, which is
Always a good idea.
yeah, the first thing first. So getting from location to location. So a lot of people when they you know hear about Namibia or they think about the Namibia, they say, oh yeah, there's a lot of driving, oh, but there's a lot of distance between. Oh yeah, I'm not so sure about this. And yeah, geographically, that is right. There is, you know, a lot of distance between, you know, certain locations. But I think that what we've got absolutely right with the itineraries that we put together that are group tours, but also that we would put together as trip ideas, is the correct places to stop at en route to each location. So if one considers the main locations as Windhoek being the capital and the starting and end point of a trip,
Yeah.
Etosha National Park, the Skeleton Coast National Park, and the Namib Desert. Those four areas, you know, they are, you know, 7 hours apart from each other, and nobody's going to want to do that as a driving itinerary and have fun doing it. But the places that you can stop off in between those areas, the private reserves, for example, the private concessions, the lodges that you can stop off between Windhoek and Etosha National Park, for example. There's a couple of places that break that journey up, like Okunjima, where there's the Africat Foundation, where there's the Cheetah Conservation Fund, another place, or there's Ochiwa Private Reserve. These places are midway between, for example, Windhoek and Etosha, and serve as a very, very value part of an itinerary, but also as a great stopping off point as well to spend the time, you know, enjoying the wildlife. So in terms of getting from one location to another, I would say that there are key locations that need to form part of an itinerary, and then intermediary transitionary locations that are well worth visiting, that have a right to be visited on their own, but also they break up those journeys. So really, with Namibia, I'm absolutely certain that fantastic itineraries can be created that are by land, journeying 2, 3, maybe 4 hours at the very most in any one day to get to your next accommodation, if that makes sense, without having to flog yourself on long journeys. If you haven't got that amount of time, though, then the flying option is a really good option. And there's 3 or 4 private aircraft companies that operate taxi services, basically, that go around the country in, you know, anti-clockwise or clockwise formation. Some of the lodges are part of larger organisations where they have their own flight that flies customers from one of their lodges to another of their next lodges, etc. So these kind of things really make seeing those distant locations quicker if you haven't got time. They also allow for getting into the more very remote areas more comfortably as well, which is why, for example, we use the flying safari method with a living desert group tour that I do to get right into that very difficult area of the Skeleton Coast. But equally, the flying safari has merit for scenic purposes too. And
yeah, absolutely.
People who want to do a fly in as part of Namibia, I'd absolutely recommend doing one, for example, either from Windhoek or from the coast into the desert, because that's spectacular, or perhaps flying out from the desert back to Windhoek or back to Walvis Bay in order to fly home. It has merit.
So you can combine the two, right? So you can do a certain amount of self-driving and flying.
Absolutely combinable. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. And the really good thing about self-drive is that there's lots of depots, at either end of a natural itinerary, whether it's Windhoek or at the coast, which are the natural end and start points of an itinerary. So you can easily do a self-drive that goes from Windhoek all the way around to the end at the coast, and then you do a fly-in safari down to the desert and back home from there. So it's very combinable. It's really well designed to do that. I guess ultimately it all comes down to individuals' budgets. So that's the first one.
Of course.
The second point about the popularity of, particularly Etosha National Park during that dry period.
Yeah, and it was like how many vehicles you might see when you're sitting around a waterhole, I think was kind of the key thing there.
Yeah, I think you're not going to be on your own for all of the wildlife experiences, definitely not. And from the experiences that I've had, there's enough water holes for people to be able to move on and move around. Over on the eastern side, I think the most I've had one of the larger water holes. There's a water hole called Klein Namatoni. I think that it's been about 10 vehicles there or so, but it's quite a large area, and you're not jostling for position. You're certainly not. I've never had that experience where you've got a whole bunch of vehicles all cramming around one waterhole because there's a lion there or anything like that. I've never had that before. I'm sure that it probably happens, but God knows how many times I've been to Etosha National Park, but I've never had that. But I would, to manage people's expectations though, during October, I've never had, a particularly crowded experience, but I'm sure that it can happen. If a leopard is seen or cheetahs are seen, then word gets around. Of course, that's unfortunately what happens. But with the right guide and with the right leadership, you can go off and find water holes that you can be the only ones there. You just got to know where they are. Like, for example, that photograph of that abundance of wildlife at the water hole, to demonstrate the congregations and that concentration of wildlife. That was a photo that I took in October, just gone, and I went there with the group. We were 2 vehicles, and we were 2 of 4 vehicles there, and we were there for about 2 hours. And after about half an hour, the other 2 vehicles that were there went away. So we just had that water hole to ourselves. So you can find isolation and solitude there, and you can find that personal wildlife experience with the right guide. Definitely that can be done.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much for that. So one of the things that a couple of different people have asked is about the possibility of traveling on a trip like, going to Namibia as a particularly good example, since obviously that's what we're talking about this evening. But a couple of different people have asked about traveling with youngsters and also traveling with parents, for example, sort of the concept of I guess kind of grandparents, parents, and children, sort of a multi-generational type
generation.
thing. Is Namibia, set up nicely for that, or not so much?
No, I think it is definitely. So the multi-generational idea is becoming more popular actually, and we're seeing that through families worldwide, our sister company, and I think Namibia is a really good choice for, the grandparent and the parents who are wanting to go, right, we want to have a big hurrah together, all 8 of us, all 10 of us, whatever. Namibia is really
Yeah,
good for that for a number of reasons. Number one, those travel times, you can cut them down really comfortably into 2, 3, maximum 4 hours slots. The wildlife is just fantastic. So it appeals to all ages, from very young to the grandparents. It's got an amazing amount of scenery to be looking at, which everybody marvels at all the time.
yeah,
The cultural experience is brilliant, which appeals to the children. And over on the coast, it wasn't part of this particular presentation, but over on the coast, there's a great amount of activities to be offered there as well, like dolphin cruises. You can do seal kayaking. You can
yeah,
do fantastic desert tours from the coastal towns, where they take you out into the dune areas of the coastal dune areas of towns like Swakopmund, for example. They do mountain biking tours, or they're called fat biking tours, into the desert as well. So there's great activities for all ages, but also the accommodations are fantastic for families, really good for families. You don't have to be staying at the high-end wildlife lodges. There are some brilliant family-focused 3, 4-star accommodations that have all of the amenities and all of the services that a family needs, whilst also catering for those within the family who've got a strong wildlife interest as well. And it's due south, so the jet lag is almost non-existent.
yeah.
It's good climate, good food. It's great for families and the multi-generation. Really good.
The other thing, of course, perhaps just to throw in on that one, you've made me think of one or two things, certainly in respect to some of the stuff that we do in Zambia and also in Botswana to some extent, is that you showed photographs of a Cessna 208 Grand Caravan, which accommodates 12 people. All of a sudden, if you've got 9, 10, 11, or of course 12 people traveling together as a family, as a group, I should say, movement by light aircraft, Cessna Grand Caravan, actually becomes much more cost effective,
Very. Yeah.
um, and makes a safari trip like this a very, very, very special experience. If you've got
Yeah.
your own aircraft taking you from place to place, it really makes it a really wonderful experience. As I say, obviously, well, as you know, Nick, of course, we do that sort of thing in Botswana, we do it in Zambia, we do it
Yeah.
in 1 or 2 other places, and Namibia would fit rather perfectly with that, I would suspect.
Absolutely. And if it is a multi-generational thing, definitely it doesn't need, the aircraft doesn't need to be the main form of
No,
transport.
no,
It can
no,
be one element or for one
exactly,
journey. But yeah,
exactly.
no, absolutely, yeah, yeah.
I'll just chuck a couple more things at you. I'm conscious of time. We're cruising towards 9 o'clock. Um, but you mentioned photography, and of course showed some super photographs, including the one that is presently on screen. I just wonder, in the years that you have been going there, how good are the photographic opportunities now versus photographic opportunities in the past? Just considering things like the water holes and the hides and the safari vehicles, because 1 or 2 people have asked about the possibility of going to a particular location, a nice lodge for argument's sake, or 1 or 2 different lodges, but staying for an extended period of time in those places, specifically for photography, and of course to some extent bird watching, I guess, but photography is where the questions have come. Is that a possibility? Would that work?
Yeah, it's increasingly better. I think actually, Namibia is not unique into improving its photographic offering in the way that you're describing. There is no doubt Namibia is one of the most photogenic destinations you can go to. It is naturally, as I said earlier, awesome, and if you're a good photographer, then you're going to be in your element. And increasingly, as we've seen with other destinations around the world, accommodations and providers, etc., are upping the ante, upping their game in respect to being able to cater for those. So, for example, that reserve on the southern border with Etosha on Gava, as I said, 6 or 7 years ago, they tore down their bamboo, shack of a hide, and rebuilt it beautifully, lower down, so that there were the eye windows were more at water level. They were able to put in gimbals so that photographers can attach their cameras. And there's more of that happening around Namibia. I've seen more of these high-end hides coming in that not only suit the general naturalist, but also suit the keen photographer, wildlife photographer as well. So lodges are, the vehicles are as well. Certain providers are now providing photographic specific vehicles that again have gimbals on them. They have slightly lower kind of barriers on the side of the vehicle, so that able to take a photograph that's closer to the ground as well. So there are certain providers and certain accommodations that are catering for that. I think that the best way, though, to photograph Namibia is actually not to overdo it in one destination, because you're not going to see the variety. If you're to spend 5 days, for example, in Etosha National Park at one lodge, I would be saying, well, you'd be better to actually spend 3 days and 2 days in 2 different areas, for example. There's a few exceptions to the rule, such as the Skeleton Coast, but I think that 3 days typically would be a maximum, I'd have thought, to do on the eastern side, on the southern side, or in any part of Namibia normally. That's what I'd be suggesting, because the wildlife that you're going to see there isn't going to move around too much. It's not going to change that much. But there may be some exceptions to the rule, though.
Nick, that's absolutely brilliant. So I'm going to, I'm just going to ask you one other question. Francis has asked whether you see the Welwitschia plants when you're on these trips.
Yeah. So the Welwitschia, ancient plant. I think it's one of the oldest living plants in the world. And so we see them. There is in the southern part of Namibia. Oh no, sorry, I'm going to contradict myself here. It's not in the southern part at all. It's in the central part of Namibia, and it's just north of the Namib Desert. There's the Welwitschia plains, where there's a lot of Welwitschia to be seen there. It doesn't form part naturally. It doesn't actually. That route doesn't form part of an itinerary, so it's a bit awkward to get to. But on the trips that I do, we go and see the Welwitschia. There are Welwitschia on the journey that you can make between the 2 ephemeral rivers. There's Welwitschia that you can see there between the Juanib and the Huarusib. There's also Welwitschia that can be seen on other itineraries that we offer. I think you'll put the poll up in a minute, and I can just explain what the trips are.
I've done that, Nick, actually already.
Oh, have you? Okay.
Yeah, I'm conscious of time, Nick.
Fine. But yes, so Welwitschia can be seen in Namibia, and if you want it to be part of your itinerary, then I can certainly help with making sure that you're going to the right places to see them.
Brilliant. Nick, thank you very much. Apologies to those of you whose questions I haven't managed to get to, but we are knocking on the door of 9 o'clock. Nick has been chatting now for an hour and a half about his favourite destination on earth, for which we are very, very grateful. Nick, thank you so much. Thank you very much to everybody for being on board this evening. If you would like to join me on Thursday, I will be talking about Costa Rica. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. Thank you once again, Nick. We'll see you very soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.